What if the family you thought you knew was built on a lie so fragile that one secret could shatter it all? Eleanor Grayson stood alone in the shadowed study of her late husband's sprawling estate, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and dust. The walls, lined with books Daniel had loved, seemed to whisper his memory. It had been 6 months since his sudden death, a heart attack, the doctors said, though it felt like the world had stopped beating too. At 38, Eleanor was a widow, left to navigate a life that no longer made sense. But the real storm wasn't her grief, it was the vultures circling her home, demanding what they believed was theirs. Daniel's family, the Graysons, were old money, their wealth rooted in generations of cunning and control. His parents, Margaret and Charles, wore their privilege like armor, their smiles sharp as knives. From the moment Daniel's will was read, they'd made their intentions clear: the fortune, his investments, properties, and the estate itself belonged to them. "He was our son," Margaret had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy at the lawyer's office. "It's only right the family legacy stays with us." They didn't see Eleanor as family, she was the outsider, the middle-class girl who'd married up. To them, she was a temporary fixture, now an obstacle. Eleanor clutched the edge of Daniel's desk, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. She loved him fiercely, not for his wealth, but for his quiet kindness, his dry humor, the way he'd hum off-key while cooking her breakfast. The Graysons never understood that. They saw only dollar signs, and they'd spent months pressuring her to sign over the estate. They'd sent lawyers, made veiled threats, even spread whispers in their elite circles that she was unstable, unfit to manage Daniel's legacy. But Eleanor wasn't breaking. Not yet. The fight had begun in earnest 3 months ago, when Charles arrived unannounced, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the grief still clinging to her. "Eleanor, be reasonable," he'd said, standing in the foyer like he already owned it. "You can't manage this alone. Sign the papers, and we'll ensure you're comfortable." His tone implied charity, not fairness. She refused, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. That night, she found a letter tucked in Daniel's old journal, hidden behind a false panel in his desk. It was addressed to her, in his handwriting, and it changed everything. The letter wasn't just words, it was a lifeline. Daniel had written it a year before his death, as if he'd sensed the storm coming. He detailed his family's greed, their manipulations, how they'd pressured him to cut Eleanor out of his will. But he'd refused. Instead, he'd left her everything, not just the fortune, but something more, a secret trust, hidden from his family, containing evidence of their shady business dealings. "You're stronger than they know," he'd written. "Use this if they come for you." It was her ace, the card they never expected. But she hadn't played it. Not yet. The Graysons escalated their campaign. Margaret called daily, her voice syrupy with concern that barely masked her disdain. "Think of Daniel's legacy," she'd say. "You wouldn't want to tarnish it." Their daughter, Clara, Daniel's sister, was worse. She'd show up at the estate uninvited, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood as she critiqued Eleanor's failure to maintain the family's standards. "You're out of your depth," Clara sneered once, eyeing the unpolished silver in the dining room. Eleanor bit her tongue, the weight of the letter burning in her mind. Then came the twist she hadn't seen coming. One rainy evening, as thunder rattled the windows, a stranger knocked on her door. He was wiry, in his 50s, with a nervous tic and eyes that darted like a cornered animal. "I'm Victor," he said, clutching a worn briefcase. "I was Daniel's accountant." Eleanor's heart sank. Another vulture, she thought. But Victor wasn't there for money. He was there to confess. Over coffee in the kitchen, Victor unraveled a story that shifted the ground beneath her. He'd worked for the Graysons for decades, cooking their books to hide tax evasion and dubious investments. Daniel had found out 2 years ago and confronted him. Instead of firing Victor, Daniel had recruited him to gather proof documents, emails, ledgers, all now stashed in the secret trust. Victor had stayed silent out of fear, but Daniel's death and Eleanor's fight had stirred his conscience. "I couldn't let them win," he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This backs up everything in the trust. Use it." Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the drive. Victor's confession was a spark in the dark, reigniting her resolve. The Graysons weren't just greedy, they were criminals. And now, she had the power to expose them. But the choice wasn't simple. Playing the card meant destroying Daniel's family, tarnishing his name alongside theirs. Could she do that to the man she loved? Or was protecting his true legacy, his integrity, worth the cost? The final showdown came at a family meeting, orchestrated by Margaret in a sleek conference room downtown. The Graysons sat across from Eleanor, their lawyer flanked by a stack of documents. Charles leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "Sign the estate over, Eleanor. Or we'll drag this through court until you're bankrupt." Clara smirked, twirling a pen like a weapon. Margaret's eyes gleamed with triumph, certain they'd won. Eleanor took a deep breath, her heart pounding but her resolve unbreakable. She slid the USB drive onto the table, its small weight heavier than any fortune. "Before I sign," she said, her voice clear, "you should know what Daniel left me." She described the trust, the evidence, Victor's testimony. The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Clara's pen froze. Margaret's face paled. Charles sputtered, but no words came. "This can stay between us," Eleanor continued, "or it can go public. Your choice." She wasn't bluffing. The letter, the drive, Victor's confession, they were her armor, her sword. The Graysons had underestimated her, seeing only a grieving widow, not a woman forged in love and loss, armed with truth. They backed down. The papers were shredded, the threats withdrawn. Eleanor kept the estate, not for the money, but for Daniel, for the life they'd built, the love they'd shared. She sold the mansion, too heavy with memories, and moved to a small cottage by the sea, where she could hear the waves and feel him in the wind. The trust remained locked away, a silent guardian of her peace. In the end, Eleanor learned that wealth wasn't in the fortune she'd protected, but in the courage she'd found. The Graysons had come for her, expecting weakness, but she'd held the one card they never saw coming, the truth. And with it, she'd reclaimed not just her future, but the man she'd loved, whose heart still beat in every choice she made.